When we study physics, we must go beyond the self-imposed limits of what a discipline can call reality. That changes everything. I'm a physicist, and therefore I study how physical reality works with a sense that that's all there is. I was also expecting if I did everything right, I should be happy. But I was not happy. One night I wake up, and all of a sudden, out of my chest, this beam of energy is coming from me. The essence of what I thought that I am changed from this way to that way. I decided that's what I want to do for the rest of my life, unite physics and spirituality. If you look at yourself, what is the deepest longing that you have? The deepest longing that I have myself is to know myself, to know why am I here? What is this universe for? To know. Consciousness is the capacity of one to know itself. And it is in this one wants to know itself that there is the joining of physics and spirituality. Let me explain.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Know Thyself. Today we're sitting down with a physicist, inventor, and entrepreneur. Everyone watching this discussion is doing so using the silicon gate technology our guest today invented. Chips evolved from his first commercial microprocessor. He was also the first to invent touchpads and touchscreens. He went on to build neural network architecture in the 80s, attempting to create consciousness through computers. He is probably one of the most well-rounded idealists alive. He embodies an incredibly rare combination of hard-nosed, scientifically informed thought with direct introspective insights into the primacy of consciousness. We'll be exploring what is consciousness, why it cannot be explained from the materialist view, his emerging new theory that changes the idea of who we are in a fundamental way and restores meaning and purpose to the universe that materialism has essentially denied. We live in a time where the collective awareness and understanding around fundamental questions of reality, such as science, consciousness, meaning, and more, are transitioning, they're deepening, they're being revolutionized, and it's an exciting time to be alive. When wanting to understand how the physical universe works and its limits and what's beyond it, I don't know if I could have a better person be sitting in discussion with today than someone who is an individual at the forefront, truly with a cutting-edge knowledge to synthesize our understanding of science, consciousness, and life. Federico Faggin, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andre. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Like I said in the intro, you really have this unique, rare combination of the scientific understanding and the limits of the physical universe with also the interiority and personal experience. And I would actually love to just jump straight to your kind of awakening experience that you had that really was the pivot, the shift from being a materialist scientist into exploring consciousness in a much more fundamental way. So could you walk us through your experience at that moment?
Yeah, I need to give you perhaps a little bit of background because I'm a physicist, and therefore I study how physical reality works, and with a sense that that's all there is, and that's really pretty much what science today is telling us about the reality. And I had accepted that that must be true. And I was also expecting that if I did everything right, quote unquote, whatever that means, I should be happy. And that did not turn out that way. In fact, I did everything right, according to the book, but I was not happy, and I was pretending to be happy. And it was only because I realized that I was pretending to be happy, and I have learned, being an entrepreneur, I had learned to take responsibility for what happened in my life, that I put my foot down and said, no, I must understand why I'm not happy. In those days, I was studying consciousness, but I was working on neural networks. I was studying books in neuroscience, and I wanted to understand how come that we are conscious. The neuroscientists don't tell us how we're conscious. They explain, how we work by electrical signals and biochemical signals in the brain. And I didn't see how I could possibly get sensations and feelings, what philosophers call qualia, out of electrical signals. And so I was really curious. Being a scientist and being also a technologist, I wanted to understand how I could program a computer to be conscious. And the more I thought, the more impossible it was, because there is nothing in physics that tells you how to convert electrical signals or bits in a computer into sensations and feelings. So the core was, what are sensations and feelings, which is how we experience life. And so it was in this climate where I was unhappy, which is also a problem of consciousness. I wanted to understand what consciousness is. And it happened one night, 1990, was Christmas holidays, was skiing up in the Sierras, Tahoe, with my family. And one night I wake up midnight, was thirsty, went to get a glass of water. Then I went back to bed, just waiting to fall asleep again. And all of a sudden, out of my chest, this beam of energy, white scintillating light, is love. But is a love that it was 10,000 times, 50,000 times, who knows, stronger than anything that I've ever experienced, is coming from me. And my consciousness is in this rush of energy. And is love, joy, and peace. Peace, I've never had felt that peace. I was always trying to get somewhere. I was never happy where I was. But this is me. That's home. This is me. I am that. Actually, I am this. Instead of that, this that comes out of me. And then this energy, all of a sudden is everywhere. And this white scintillating light, my consciousness is in that light. And so now I am observing myself. So I'm the observer of myself. This energy, because this love was there, this joy and this peace was there as well. And then a thought forms. Wow, a thought. But I already got what the thought was trying to say. The thought was, oh, this stuff is what everything is made of. But these are symbols. What before that thought, there was the understanding that the thought expressed. And then that was the end of it. My body was vibrating, like the cells of my body were resonating with what was going on. So body, mind, emotions, and the connection with everything was all in this holistic experience. So I was one observing itself with my point of view. That's what I'm saying now. But at that time, I had exactly the sense without the words to say what I just said.
So that explanation you just gave is incredible. I think it is possibly one of the only thing that could transform someone's rational mind of trying to, reduce life and phenomena into a series of explainable parts. You had the interiority experience, which, the Eastern wisdom traditions have been speaking to for millennia, but haven't had the science to make it rigorous.
Yep.
And what I really love, and having conversations around consciousness on this podcast, like with Don Hoffman recently and yourself and others, is that have these experiences, these meditative experiences that point to a reality that feels far more vast than anything we could deduce intellectually. And so the conjunction of both is really exciting to me. So let's keep diving deeper here. As this experience happened, how then did your rational mind start to pivot in what you were doing in the world? Because you were somebody who was very successful in the fruits of your labor in the classical physicalist model, right? And then from this experience afterwards, your energies and, mind started to change into exploring more how consciousness could be more fundamental, constituent of the universe. And so from that moment forward, what were the coming years and decades? What did that look like for you as you started to change how you what you were studying in your field of expertise?
Yeah. The essence of what I am, what I thought that I am, changed from this way to that way. So before I thought I was separate from everything, from the universe. I thought that to prove something, you had to show a theorem and go through the logical proof of a theorem, that was the highest certainty that you could have is by demonstrating a theorem. That knowing that came, I was asking what is consciousness, I realized much later that the asking was a prayer. I didn't know that I was praying, but I wanted to know. I have taken responsibility for myself and I wanted to know. I got the answer. That answer was so unbelievably impossible to imagine to me that, once you have this thing, you know that it must be true that way. This is direct experience of who you are. How more do you need? But of course, it doesn't give you a formula. It's not a number or a series of numbers. It's how we really know, how consciousness knows. And so that was for me, wow. My rational mind would probably, if it wasn't so powerful as an experience, I would have said, well, I need to see a psychiatrist now. If I was really believing the story that I was believing before, I would have probably said, I need to see a psychiatrist because something like this is crazy.
But that's the interesting shift, is that we go from needing to intellectually rationalize things to having the immediacy of the experience, which is self-evident.
Yeah.
It's like it. So there's that gnosis, the intelligence of the body that knows, that I feel like in the Western mind, we've really lost being in touch with.
Of course. And that's the fundamental difference between the rational mind that wants to arrive at the truth. But you never arrive at the truth if you start with truth that are assumed to be true, which is the postulates that you start with. So it's foolish to believe that you can get to the truth if you start with truth that you cannot demonstrate. So, but our consciousness is the truth engine, is the one that can tell you whether it's true or not. But it doesn't give you the proof. And then you have to know also how to read your experiences. So it took a number of years of studying, but studying consciousness. How? By experiencing myself. That's the only way that you know consciousness. You don't read it. Books don't tell you what consciousness is on top of it. So I went through 20 years of personal work, starting with meditation, on and on and on. Teachers came and went, in this process. And it took about 20 years, so that takes us to about 2008 or so, 2009, when I was clear to me that consciousness must be fundamental. Consciousness and free will, because to me, free will and consciousness were parts and parcel of the same thing. So that was so clear that at that point, I wanted then to connect what I knew about physics into a theory that would connect the interiority and the exteriority. Physics only describes what you can measure in the space and time. But what you can feel, is that in space and time? Cannot possibly be in space and time. So where is it? And so that was the journey where I dedicated myself 100%. I decided that's it. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. Unite physics and spirituality into a seamless whole where you can no longer tell the boundaries between one and the other.
And it is the most exciting time to be alive, at least I feel, where the unification of science and spirit is becoming one. We're seeing how they are different ways of looking at the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And, I think there are countless people that have these inner luminous experiences, the experience of their interconnectedness and oneness with all of reality. And it can also be equally, misleading, where the mind wants to interpret certain things that we might have different prejudices or beliefs that will be fulfilling that, or looking through the lens of those beliefs through to describe what the experience is, which is also equally dangerous if your goal is to get in touch with objective reality. And so that's why I love diving into these conversations where we're teeter-tottering between both the exterior understanding and the interior experience, finding the concealings between the two, hopefully coming to a deeper understanding of it all. Now, as we dive deeper and deeper into the many nuances of this conversation, I would love to lay the framework and just some definitions to start around how you personally define consciousness, the classical and quantum view. That way, when we use different words throughout this podcast, everybody can understand we're on the same boat of what we're speaking to.
Yeah.
So if you would, how you define consciousness,
Yeah.
and then also we spoke to a little bit the classical and quantum view.
Yeah, consciousness is the capacity of one, the totality of what exists, to know itself. So it's the capacity to know by self-reflection. But the interesting thing in the way I look at this is that when one wants to know itself, and in fact, we need to start with a postulate, because otherwise we run around this thing and we never get to it. So the postulate that I'm using is one is the totality of what exists, what potentially can exist, and what actually exists. And I make a clear distinction because you cannot get something from nothing. Many theories of reality starts with nothing and you get something. I do not believe that that's correct. You have to start with some potentiality that becomes actuality. So when one is holistic, meaning is not made of separable part. Everything is interconnected within one. I mean, this is, goes back to the Vedas. I mean, but it was very clear to me that lack of separation was fundamental in my first experience, the awakening experience. I was not separate. I was the observer and the observed. There is no separation between the two. But that's also what quantum physics is saying. There is no observer separate from what is observed. Okay? Quantum physics is very clear about that. So one is holistic, one is dynamic. It's never the same instant after instant. Is always changing. So far, I have described quantum physics, what quantum physics says, not classical physics, quantum physics. And then I'm adding one wants to know itself. And it is in this one wants to know itself that there is the joining of physics and spirituality. It is the knowing itself. Okay. So if you believe that one needs to know itself, then one cannot be omniscient, because otherwise it would know everything already. And there would be no evolution. We wouldn't be here, certainly. So one wants to know itself means that one will have to continue to know itself, because we know within ourselves that the more you know, the more there is to know, because the more connections between what we have known exist. And so there is an explosion of self-knowing that can occur. So, but one, if you start with this point, then when one knows itself, he has to bring into existence what he knows. It comes from potential existence, like the unconscious of one, into manifestation, which is existence.
Like from a wave to a particle?
From a little bit like that, but not quite. Not
Sure.
quite. We have to be careful not to read too much, because it's from a potentiality which is neither a wave nor a particle yet. It is even before you can even imagine what it is, to an existence. But the existence that so what happens is that knowing and existing are two aspects of the same thing. Knowing and existing are two faces of the same coin. Because so when one knows itself, it brings into existence a part whole of itself. Because being holistic, it cannot know itself only partially. It has to know itself completely. But it has to know itself with a particular point of view. That was very clear to me 8 years ago. It has to know itself in a point of view, like a perspective. But one has many perspectives in which it can know itself. So now there can be many perspectives in which one knows itself completely. And so it brings into existence a part whole, which I call conscious as unit, is like the monad of Leibniz. The monads of Leibniz are very similar concepts. Leibniz is the only philosopher and scientist and mathematician that I know of that actually understood the concept. This is what I'm talking about. And I found it out later, but to me that was clear that it had to be something like that, based on my experiences. Because in my 20 years where I was exploring consciousness, I had hundreds of different extraordinary experiences of consciousness. They reveal aspects of consciousness that were certainly not, they were coherent with the awakening experiences that I described, but they illuminated different parts of this spectrum of capacities that consciousness has. So if we start there, then one wants to know itself. Then the wanting to know itself is the will, the free will of one. One decides which way to know itself. That's free will. The essence of free will is the capacity of one to direct his own knowing, self-knowing, which is also the capacity that we have. That's what free will is for us. And the capacity to know itself is consciousness. So now we have defined free will and consciousness. And the two must work together. You cannot have consciousness without free will. It would be like you know something, but you cannot do anything about it. You know what you want, but you cannot act on that desire that you have. It'd be foolish. It would be just the universe would be a joke. Would not be serious, inconsistent. So starting this way, you can unite physics, spirituality. The world now has meaning and purpose. The entire universe has meaning and purpose. The materialism has erased simply by saying everything that exists must be measured. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. How is it possible? Already quantum physics is telling you that a particle that is not looked at is not even in space and time. You can only be described in a deeper reality, and only when you measure it. In other words, when a field interacts with another field, which is the field of an instrument, you have an event that manifests in space and time. And then you can say, there is a particle here, for example. But quantum physics cannot tell you where you will find the particle. It can only tell you the probability of all the possibilities in which you could potentially find the particle. So there you go again. Okay, quantum physics is not describing reality. It's only describing what you can know about reality. Big difference. And probabilities have to do with consciousness. A classical system, a computer, in a computer there are no probabilities. There are all certainties. This next state of the computer is determined by the previous state, period. So a computer can never be conscious because it doesn't have the characteristics of free will.
Can you speak on how you were very much so trying to create consciousness through computer systems?
Yeah, well, when I was, starting from reading the neuroscientist books, neuroscience, I said, well, if the brain is an information processing system like a computer, which is how it is described, then I should be able to create a computer that is conscious.
Right. The idea, the classical model that consciousness is an emergent process or phenomenon out of unconscious complexity. So if we just put the right hardware together, then we should be able to create it.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and I tried for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way, because there is no way, as I mentioned earlier, to convert electrical signals in a conscious experience. How do you do that? Through qualia. What is qualia? Qualias are not numbers. Electrical signals can be reduced to numbers. Qualia are not numbers. The love that you feel for a child, your child, is that love something that you can put in one number or a series of numbers? No way. It's richer. He has dimensions that you cannot probe. You know that there is more to know about that love. It goes deeper than you can even know, but the fact that you know that it goes deeper motivates you to find out more about that love. You see, it goes beyond number. See, the deepest feeling, the deepest longing that we have, like the longing to know ourselves, goes way beyond anything that can be put into numbers. Transcends the idea of number. thus therefore transcends measurability, which is the basis of science. And in fact, science has the concept of the quantum state of a system, which can only be expressed as a probability amplitudes in an n-dimensional space where each dimension is a complex number. Complex numbers are not real numbers. Space and time is real. Described with real numbers. You cannot, complex numbers is square root of -1 is not a number. Is called I, imaginary number, just because it's not a number. Because there is no number that multiplied by itself gives you -1. So what is it? Well, actually, a complex number describes points in an infinity of points in a plane. Wow. Is that a number? No, it's not a number. And why is it useful? Because it allows you to transform, to simplify the computation. You transform a ordinary differential equations, for example, in an algebraic equation, just by using complex numbers. You can simplify the computation. So just operationally, you can find that out. But what is a complex number? In quantum physics, a complex number represents a probability amplitude. But a probability requires consciousness, is a concept of consciousness. In other words, only consciousness wants to predict the future. In a classical system, since the classical system is deterministic, there is nothing that tells you why you should predict the future. In a classical system, the prediction of the future of a conscious being is needed because the conscious being wants to predict what will happen, not having enough information about what will happen. In quantum physics, there is the collapse of the wave function, which is not a mathematical function. It is pure randomness, non-algorithmic, which is the one that decides what will manifest out of what you can compute, which are only the probabilities of all the possible positions, for example, of a particle. But the actual position is an act of free will. In this new theory that we can get into later, but I don't want to go too much into math, but fundamentally this theory is simply saying that consciousness must exist. You have to start with consciousness and with free will, like a postulate, and from there you can explain why quantum physics has the crazy properties that it has. That physicists are the first one to tell you, we don't understand why quantum physics is the way it is. Why is there the collapse of the wave function? Why do we have states that are expressing probabilities, probability amplitudes, that don't even exist in space and time? Why do we have to have that? Nobody understands. This theory explains why, because there is consciousness and there is free will.
Okay, so we just opened up many things here, the nature of free will, consciousness being fundamental. I would love for you to break down your distinction between classical, idealism versus monism, and your framework of consciousness being fundamental, and then there's a lot to open up right after that. But if you just love to give a quick overview.
Yeah. Well, basically, in this theory, there are 3 levels of reality. The fundamental reality, which is described by quantum physics, the quantum states in Hilbert space, in this n-dimensional space, that is the reality where conscious experiences are. The quantum state is a representation of a conscious experience, of qualia. So it's the best thing that mathematics can get you to represent qualia, which is not a set of numbers, because probabilities are not numbers. They refer to something else. They refer to something that might happen. They don't refer to what is. So you cannot call a probability as a number is not itself a reality. Is pointing to the probability of a reality. But the reality is the experience of the being of the conscious entity, which is a field, that is described, but the experience can only be known by the entity, cannot be known by the mathematics, cannot be described by mathematics. You see, we have a level of reality that mathematics cannot reach. That is the key here.
Yeah, truth transcends proof in a way.
Absolutely. I was trying myself, to explain consciousness with quantum physics, even though I realized that consciousness was fundamental and so on. And I told myself, I'm foolish to believe that. We need to turn it around. Consciousness must exist from the very beginning, like I had, seen, and free will had to be also, are properties of fields. They're not properties of things. They're properties of fields. And the fields don't exist in space and time. Space and time emerges from those fields. So if you start that way, all of a sudden, you can explain also why you have to have free will, which are then how the field decides what to manifest by going from probability. The theory would say you go from probability to an actuality. What's actually happened. The field makes a free will decision and manifests what actually will manifest, that you can measure in space and time. But it is a free will decision, so there is no math that can tell you what that decision is going to be. So all of a sudden, you have a completely different conception of reality. So there is, go back to the original question, there is this foundational reality, then there is the classical reality of objects that move in space and time. Those are derivatives of this deeper reality, okay? And derivative on this deeper reality based on decision, free will decision of conscious entities. And there is the body. The body is a bridge between this deeper reality and the classical reality. The body is quantum and classical. The body is characterized by the type of information which are called live information, which is neither quantum information nor classical information. It's something deeper that has not been described by other physicists so far. It's just is a basic idea that has to be that way. It's essentially the best way to imagine it is like my words are waves. My words are waves. They are dynamic, and they convey a lot more information than when I write down what I'm saying. When I write down what I'm saying, those are static symbols. They have lost all the rest of my emotions and whatever this dynamic wave can carry. And so live information, live symbols are just like spoken words. Classical symbols are like written words in a book, or so there is a big difference in the capacity to express meaning, because the meaning is what exists in the deeper reality. There is no information, there is meaning, is the meaning of the information in the deeper reality. In the outer reality, there is only classical information, which is symbols, numbers. There are numbers here, non-numbers here, qualia here, and comprehension of qualia in the deeper reality. And the body is a bridge that allows this deeper reality to communicate with this classical reality through the body.
So I guess the difference I just want to highlight between idealism and monism is that instead of just saying that consciousness is fundamental and all there is, it's viewing matter as a host of consciousness in a way. Is that correct?
Yeah. Look at matter this way. My theory is a monistic theory, but not in the, and I don't want to get into, these boxes. We tend to put things into boxes when, frankly, when you talk about one, where one is not made of boxes. Is everything is interconnected with one. So the boxes enclose what the box is supposed to contain, like a set in mathematics. Okay, is a closed thing. Something belongs or doesn't belong to the set. So here we are talking about something, that transcends many of the mathematical concepts that are so foundational in mathematics. So here, the foundation of our capacity to know is qualia and comprehension that get us to the meaning of information. And the meaning is something that can only be known from the inside by the field that wants to know itself. So when one creates monads, consciousness units, these consciousness units have the same properties of one to know themselves. They want to know themselves. They also can procreate other monads, that just like one created the monad, created the consciousness unit. In other words, the property of these fields are the properties of one, but with the one difference that only in one point, this entity only can know reality from the point of view with which one created those entity. Since one has potentially infinite points of view, then there are potentially infinite consciousness units or monads. And so there are potentially infinite ways then that those consciousness units can combine into higher level hierarchies of consciousness units. So we are, all of a sudden we have an unbelievable structure that emerges from knowing, from the desire of one to know itself, and the fact that knowing and existing are aspects of the same thing.
Why do you think there's a fundamental desire of the one to know itself? And in a way, why does it need to differentiate to know itself in so many different ways?
If you look at yourself, what is the deepest longing that you have? The deepest longing that I have myself is to know myself, to know why am I here, to know what is this universe for, to know. So to know is the deepest longing the human have had. In fact, the deepest wisdom and the deepest knowing comes from this longing, and it's given rise to then spirituality, then religions, and then eventually science. But, this longing is before all of that. This longing is there, and science is satisfying only the surface longing, the one, to understand what you can, what you can measure. But somehow science has moved away from the spirituality, has not given value of reality. I wouldn't say science with the capital S, I would say more like scientism or materialism has given only value of reality to what you can measure in space and time. So basically for this materialistic view, there is nothing other than matter. But that's a starting point. That's a postulate that has never been proven. It's a postulate to say that there is only matter. So when you know within yourself that there are things that you cannot understand, they go way beyond what can be measured in space and time, like the love that you feel or the courage that you feel, to take action against the beliefs system that are around you.
So it's within that understanding that I've heard you share that existence knows itself through the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this podcast is called Know Thyself, right? At least, certainly one of my highest values is in the discovery of who I truly am. Who am I in the essence of that? And I think our audience largely is has that desire. And, I think we all fundamentally do. And so, as we start with the surface level of understanding of just the Western minded view of the surface level, I am my body, I am my name, we start to see how these things we are not. And you can start to go down the list of everything from your name, your caste, your creed, your ethnicity. None of these things are fundamentally you. And so you start asking, well, okay, then what actually could I be? What is indivisible, in the essence of who I truly am? And so I think the word that you started using which is Seity, is an interesting kind of distinction. So I would love for you to share your definition of what that is, and how is it different from what most people would say is a soul, that we have a soul. I think, there's some distinctions that help take it out of the bucket of conceptual understanding that we have with that word of soul. So what is Seity?
Yeah. So, but let me just say one thing to connect with what I said earlier, that science is also about knowing. So even science wants to know, right? But they are restricting what they want to know on what can be measured in space and time. So everything that we do that is beyond kind of pure survival is about knowing. Okay, science included. Okay, so back to Seity. So Seity simply take a quantum field of electrons, quantum fields of electrons well defined in physics, okay, quantum physics. I say this quantum field has consciousness and has free will. Then I call it Seity because it's not the quantum fields of physics. But it is everything that physics is saying plus consciousness and free will. Now, all of a sudden you have an entity that can evolve and can know itself and everything else because it's a part whole of one. In this way of thinking, all of a sudden, you are connecting immediately physics, which are the quantum fields, with spirituality, which is the fact that these fields are conscious and have free will.
Okay, great. So I'll just read a quote from your book, which is new and out now. By the way, we haven't mentioned Irreducible, second to your first book, that I've been absolutely loving diving into. This quote that I just want to read, which is on this exact topic, you said, "I believe instead that we are Seities who temporarily inhabit our bodies. We are eternal, conscious beings rather than perishable bodies, and we are here to learn crucial aspects of ourselves by interacting with each other in the physical universe that we have co-created for this very purpose. Everything we perceive in the universe was initially envisioned in the consciousness of the Seities because classical reality follows quantum reality and not vice versa. And quantum physics follows quantum information, which in turn represents the thoughts, desires, and conscious experiences of the Seities."
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to elaborate there? It was pretty thorough.
Yeah, it's pretty thorough. I think that the crucial thing here is to always make the distinction. When I say I don't mean the body. And when we say I, we tend to generally mean the body. So the body is not where consciousness exists. The body is a quantum classical structure that exists in space and time, but is also connected with this quantum reality, and that's why it is a monism. Okay, if you take the field of electrons, the quantum field of electrons, the electrons are not objects separate from the fields. They are in physics, in quantum physics, an electron is a state of a field, is some structure, some form that appears in the field itself, just like a wave of the sea. A wave of the sea is part of the sea, cannot be separated from the sea. So the properties of the wave are actually the properties of the field. The properties of the electron are the properties of the quantum fields of electron, which is conscious and has free will. So the fact that you cannot separate the original matter from the deeper reality tells you that it's a monism. You don't have spirit and matter. They are all manifestation. Matter is a manifestation of spirit. Matter is a manifestation of mind.
So can you help me wrap my mind around how a Seity could possess individuality? Because when you look at the word self, there's many different layers. Like we said, we could perceive it as from the body to the mind to who we are in a more fundamental nature that is an energy that we are inhabiting in a physical body temporarily in this experience.
Yeah.
So this has a lot of implications, obviously, and is congruent with, like I said, a lot of Eastern wisdom traditions that have been talking about this for millennia. So what is the practical differentiation in how you explain the soul and the Seity and what that implies to what happens when we die, the personality and qualities of us that maybe carry over once this physical body dies. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious to see how you kind of think about these things.
So the identity of the Seity, the best way to look at that is the point of view with which one knew itself originally when it created this Seity, this field that is conscious and has free will, which is a part whole of one. That point of view is the identity, is the fact that that field will maintain that identity forever. So it is in a way, it is imprinted by one in its giving birth to this, to this new field, which is a new self-knowing of itself. So one self-knows creates a part whole of itself with a point of view, which is the identity, which is the uniqueness of that field. And the uniqueness remains the uniqueness of that field forever. That field is eternal. Or if one is not eternal, he has the same duration of one. But you can, because that, if one wants to know itself, the last thing that one wants is to forget, what he has learned about itself, right? So there has to be a memory of the self-knowing of one, which is also the memory, the self-knowing of the Seities that are created by one. So there has to be a way to remember the experience. And that's another reason why you have to have classical information. Classical information is information that allows you to remember an experience, a quantum experience, because a quantum state only exists for a very short period of time. So if you better put in memory what you experience, otherwise you forget about it. Because the next thing that you experience, if you didn't put in memory what you experienced earlier, is gone. So, it's like we imagine the present and moves toward the future. Well, no, there is no future and there is no past. It's the past that grows from the present, which is the memory of what you had experienced. So the past moves the back. And the future is what actually is appears in this present. So that's a better way to understand time when you consider who we are. And that is consistent also with what physics is saying, but in a deeper way than normally we think of it.
So in your first awakening experience, you felt like you recognized that you are light.
Mm-hmm.
And
light and love and peace and joy. Again, there are no separation between these fundamental concepts.
And then you felt from that experience that you are this one point of the one in which it knows itself, like a point or a dot on a circle in which there are potentially infinite amounts of dots that could be there.
I perceive myself as a point of view of one upon itself. In other words, and the reason why I say that is because the sense of me that I had in that extraordinary experience was the same sense of me that I've always had when I was 5 years old, 30, or at that time almost 50. So, that sense of me, that's my identity, that's who I am. That is the self. But I call it identity because, again, self has so many meanings, and so I want to use names, Seity, which is the fact of, being the selfhood.
Yeah. And that's why the awakening process is often referred to as self-realization, because you're coming into awareness of something that was prior and already existed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we have memory of our own experience.
And so we're in the process of remembering.
Yeah. And in fact, to know something that you already knew, because you also can know something that you didn't know. That's new. That's a new creation also for you. In other words, it isn't that all we know is in the past. Because everything new that we know, we bring into existence, exactly like one, when knows itself for the first time, brings into existence what it knows. This is valid for everyone.
Yeah. So then do you think there is this vast intelligence is orchestrating in a type of way the people, places, and circumstances for us to garner the experience we need to come into that self-remembering?
But by being part whole, we are all orchestrating what one wants. You see, because if we were separate parts, it would be different. Then there would be an orchestrator, but we are parts whole.
Yeah.
But notice that our body, even our body, is built the same way. It's built with parts whole. Let me explain. Every cell of my body has the genome of the egg that built the entire organism. So every part of my body, every cell, I have about 50 trillion, like you.
I got about 51.
Oh, that's good. You are better than me. So So your 51 trillion cells, each one of them has the genome that describes the entire organism. Not itself, everything, the whole thing is a part whole. The potential knowledge of the whole. That's why a cell, later on in life, can express aspects of itself that were not present at its birth. That's why there is, epigenetics. 30 years ago, it was impossible, could not exist. And now, of course, people are beginning to accept that epigenetics exist. Epigenetic is that, a cell is not determined at birth in what it's going to be able to express. It can express new things that were not present at birth. So, the entire understanding of who we are is appended. And there are people that tell you, materialists that tell you that the body is just an algorithm, biology is just like a computer. What the hell? No, a computer is made of transistors. There are not 50 trillions yet. There will be 50 trillion. So what's the big deal? A transistor is a switch, on, off. That's all. What does a switch know about the whole? The whole computer. And the software that runs in the computer? Nothing.
Yeah, how could there be the sound of a crying baby, the sight of a rose, the taste of a cherry, these qualia that can't be in the experience of a switch?
Andre, but this goes beyond that because I'm just describing a body as a physical structure in space and time, comparing to another physical structure in space and time, which is a computer, which is a purely classical system. The body is quantum and classical. The consciousness, the feelings are not in the body. They are in this field, this deeper field. They are not in the body. We project them in the body. They are not in the body. We are not. Who we are not the body. We don't exist in space and time. We exist in this deeper reality. You see, that's why we are so indoctrinated on one end and so also hypnotized into believing that we are the body, that we always fall into this trap of believing that we are the body. Yeah, we have a soul, but then when we think about ourselves, we think about the body. No, the body is just a structure that then perishes. If we were the body, then scientism would be right to say that when the body dies, it's the end of ourselves, right? If consciousness is a property of a functioning brain, when the brain doesn't function, we shouldn't exist anymore. And of course, that's what I believe when I believe in this scientism worldview, which did not take into account what quantum physics was saying. The point is that I'm trying to make is that quantum physicists are saying something that then we never reflect in our worldview.
So I just want to pick up where you were just talking about emotion and how emotion carries meaning and this understanding of live information.
Yeah.
This is a very kind of new concept, in terms of understanding how meaning is tied to the fundamental constituents of reality, instead of like an afterthought or a byproduct, I suppose, that we, intellectually make. So can you share how emotion is tied with meaning?
Yeah. Just think about love. What is love bringing to you? I mean, beyond the feeling itself, there is a meaning behind that. The qualia is one thing, right? What it feels like. That's the qualia.
Yeah.
But then the qualia are simply the entry point into the inner sanctum, which is, this field that can know, that has properties that are infinitely powerful properties to understand. Understand means to get the meaning of what? Of what you perceive, which is qualia. So the meaning is the essence of what you know. And it's also what we want to convey when we use symbols. I don't describe my qualia, I describe the meaning of qualia. When I say, I love you, am I describing what I feel? I cannot describe what I feel. So I describe, the essence that I call love, that's the meaning that this feelings has for me. But it goes deeper because love is a word. Love is a symbol, is a word. But love to you, if you really go into it, it has dimensions that are unfathomable. It has depths that you cannot fathom. So, it is, cannot be described in word. Okay? Years ago, I said, that's what the Tao is talking about. The Tao, it starts by saying the
Tao that
the Tao that you can say is not the eternal Tao.
Yeah.
Okay? What is he saying? He's saying exactly what quantum physics is saying. That you cannot copy, not even copy, a quantum state. The quantum state, which is the representation of qualia, is what you feel. And it can only be known from the inside. It can never be told from the outside. What you can say about it are only symbolic expressions of what you feel. But the symbolic expression of what you feel fall very short of what you feel. There is a theorem in quantum physics, it's called Olivos theorem. Olivos theorem said that when you have a quantum state, when you measure the quantum state, you can only get one bit of information, classical bit, per quantum bit. The quantum bits that describe the states are entangled, which is, a crazy property of quantum physics, meaning properties in common that cannot be represented in space and time. They require these n-dimensional spaces. Not only that, but each quantum bit is an infinity of possibilities, representable as a point on the surface of a sphere. So every point on the surface of a sphere, meaning a direction in space, is one of the possible states of the quantum bit. When you make a measurement of this quantum state, you set a direction, and if you set in this direction and you measure, you will find 1 or 0, which is the opposite direction. You can only find 0 or 1, no matter which way you measure it. That's a property which is incomprehensible because classical physics is not these properties. When you measure a quantum system, you disturb it, and you measure something that was not the state that it was. So the observer affects what is observed. And of course, then what is observed affects the observer by giving some information. So all of a sudden, you no longer have the situation in classical physics where the observer is separate from what is observed.
You're a participant.
And you are a participant. You are both observer, observe, and actor. You're all three. You're an agent, all three. Because we take turns, like we're taking turns now. Now, when I speak, you observe me, and when you speak, I observe you. Okay, but also my speaking affects you, but also affects me, and vice versa. So we affect each other in a way that classical systems don't affect each other at all. In classical physics, you had to make a separation between the observed and the observer. And that separation is being kept in the mind of even most physicists to this day. So they don't think of they explain what's going on in ways, but they're not clear about the role of the observer in quantum physics, because it's incomprehensible in the conception of reality that exists, which is reality is really what we can measure in space and time. So Don Hoffman talks about space and time doesn't exist. Okay, in that sense, okay, it is right, but in reality, there is, we have to explain why we have a perception of space and time and where does it come from, and so you have to think in terms of a deeper reality, and space and time are emergent properties of this deeper reality, as the other way around. Consciousness and free will are supposed to be actually free will. Typically in scientism doesn't exist, but consciousness and consciousness emerges from space and time and objects that don't have any of that. Okay, but it is the other way around. Space and time and matters and energy emerge from this deeper reality, and so they must be explained in terms of knowing. Knowing is deeper than space, time, matter, and energy.
Do you think that a conscious entity can actually know itself in its entirety?
Of course not. Not even one can know itself in its entirety. Will continue to know itself. The more it knows, the more it can know.
So knowing ourselves is a continual dynamic process.
Absolutely. It never ends. It cannot end. If it ended, it would be the end of the universe in a way, the end of evolution, the end of everything.
Yeah.
But one would be finally satisfied. It knows itself completely, and we don't, we become subsumed from one, and that will be the end of it, which is fine too.
Right.
I don't really know, but but it is reasonable to think that there is, why should time end? Besides that kind of time, which is the time that we measure, is not the time that I'm talking about. That time that we're talking about is the present. The time of experience is that sliver of present, where everything that we remember or everything that we predict is in that present. If I make a prediction of what will happen in the future, that prediction is done in the present.
This invites a feeling, at least to me internally, of a lot of spaciousness and taking pressure off of ourselves on the spiritual path, because we have in the West more of this achievement-oriented, goal-oriented mindset where it's like achieving enlightenment becomes a point in which our spiritual journey is like, we've arrived, versus you're inviting a continual journey and let's enjoy the ride.
Of course. But for me, in a way, why was I disappointed? Because I had checked all the boxes, and so I had arrived,
right? And
I should have been happy.
Yeah, the money,
because
fame.
I had always put happiness in the future because I'm not, I was supposed to achieve certain things to be happy, because that was the list of things that I had to do. But that was my imagination. And so once I arrived, I was unhappy. So what's wrong with this picture, right?
So I want to talk about this sovereignty, this reclaiming our spiritual power and the responsibility we have to do so. I love this quote I found in your book around suffering from Simone Weil that says, "Suffering as a door that we can choose to go through, and then we learn something. Or we refuse to open, and then nothing is added. Rather, it takes everything away from us."
Yeah.
And I feel like we all have these experiences in life that are challenging, and we suffer. And we can grow through suffering or grace, but oftentimes there's a lot of suffering that points us into the direction of what's not working for us in our identity and beliefs and so many different things in life. And so as the one desires to know itself, I feel, and I would love to get your perspective, as suffering kind of serves as the friction necessary for us to move into the direction of experiencing, remembering, realizing our true self. Do you agree?
I mean, my sense is that suffering is very much something that exists in this quasi-virtual reality in which we live and we believe to be the body, and we're here to learn something about ourselves that we set up to learn before incarnation. So because clearly we are not the body, so when the body dies, we are still the field that we were before the body was born. So we don't go anywhere. We continue to be the entity that was created with the point of view that we always had. When the body dies, we recover the memories of other lives that we had in this reality, maybe other possible realities, who knows? But certainly, we no longer see. Once we believe to be the body to the point that we pay attention only to the signals produced by the body, we become close in a way. We no longer observe things that are beyond the body. We observe only the stuff that the body produces, and we communicate with the body as ego. The ego is only a portion of the Seity, who we are, or this field, is that portion of the field that got in creating the characteristic of this body in order to understand itself, that a portion of itself became, hypnotized, so to speak, believing that it is the body. It is a little bit like when we control a drone. A drone, suppose you have goggles, and through these goggles you see and you hear the information that a drone is sending you. A drone is in another country, 10,000 miles away, and you see what the drone sees and you hear what the drone hears. So, and if you are intense in controlling the drone and getting the drone to do what you want, okay, you forget about whatever is around you, right? And so the drone, then you are the drone. You do whatever you're doing, and then the drone is shot down, and then this nothing here. You look around and say, "Oh my God, I'm still here." So the body controlling the drone is like your conscious fields controlling your body. Okay,
and it's analogous.
It's a good way to imagine this because the reality that you see through the eyes and ears of the drone is really what are you seeing? You're seeing bits, and those bits are actually transformed by the consciousness. They become space. They become the objects that the drone sees. How is that possible? So if you take the goggles out and you look at this reality must be the same, similar way, right? I mean, many years ago, that was so clear to me that in fact, that's because virtual realities exist. We can do it with a computer, that we can actually understand that this reality cannot be the reality, real. However, it is not purely separate from the deeper reality, because, as I told you earlier, the states of the fields cannot be separated from the field. So the virtual reality is still connected with what we are. It's our emanations of who we are. That's why the theory is a monism, like I was saying earlier. Yeah.
So I personally love that analogy. It's also, in reference to Donald Hoffman, how I love his headset analogy, because it's a very useful, thing that we can wrap our head around, so to speak, pun intended. I think where we have a virtual reality headset and we go into this other reality where our true self takes on our sensory system of seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, and hearing that plugs us into three-dimensional reality where it's very enchanting and it serves the purpose of having the experiences we need to know oneself. But we often get lost in the veil of that forgetting. And this whole journey, which we're speaking to, is the journey of remembering of who we are beyond the sensory and continual arising and passing away of phenomena that we perceive.
Yeah.
And so I feel a really important reflection now is, as all the people that are listening into this conversation right now on our journey, there is a responsibility we have to know oneself.
Yeah.
And the more that we can acknowledge that, the more that we can tap into that and embody that responsibility, the more that we start to go on that upward spiral of realization, and a lot of the things that we once suffered start to fall away. We start to become more agents of positive impact and change in the world. There's so many endless implications of that change and transformation that happens internally first and foremost. And so what do you feel is the responsibility we have for that awakening process?
Yeah, I think that even before there can be an awakening, in my way of thinking, we have to take responsibility for what happens in our life. I think that I could not have had the experience that I had if I had not taken responsibility for what happened in my life, where I was justified in blaming somebody for what happened to me. And I was not looking at how I contributed to that person harming me. So so at one point, after this issue was over, I asked myself one day, what did I do? What did I do to encourage that? Or why didn't I stop it? What was my payoff for not stopping what was going on? And it was through that process, it was painful, through that process that I realized that I had an agenda. And my agenda was that by not doing something, I was better than the guy. I was better because I was more noble. I was giving the other cheek. That's the way I was brought up in the Catholic ethos, you basically, if somebody hurts you, you give the other cheek. It's silly, right? I mean, I took that supposed teaching, into then if I do that, I'm better than the other guy.
Right.
Okay? And so that was my angle to be superior. And I said, holy camoli. I
think that's common though. We all on the part of our journey, we imbibe virtues and display them for the world as a means to build our superiority. And it's just another way the ego
So once
tries to
I
survive.
discovered the game that I was playing, I said, therefore, I was responsible for what happened to me because I did not respond properly. So never again. And that was the act of taking responsibility. Instead of blaming the other, just simply not blaming anybody. Just simply figure out what can I do better next time. That's it. Okay? Because what happens to me, in one way or another, I have contributed to bringing forth to me. If you don't take that position, it's very hard then to go the next step.
Yeah.
Because the next step for me was to acknowledge that I was pretending to be happy when I was not. And it was exactly because I took responsibility, I already had taken responsibility years before, that I was able to say, no, I want to know. I want to know. And so I put my foot down. I had having understood that I was responsible in the good or in the bad of what happens to me, then I also have the right to say, I want to know. And I got the answer. So, and I didn't have to meditation before, do all kinds of stuff before. No, it came spontaneously.
Yeah, because of the intensity of the longing.
That's right.
Yeah.
But because having taken responsibility was a crucial step in my mind to go to the next step.
And I think there is an important distinction with it not being our fault, but it is our responsibility. Because,
But we are trained, it's this fault, it's your fault, you look what you did to your brother, your fault, it's all like all this kind of, culture in which we are growing up, in which we do not understand what we're doing. And the parents, don't understand what they're doing. And when I was a parent without having opened my eyes, I was doing the same thing that my parents were doing to me. So, that's it's these cycles of inequities that keeps on propagating into the future. So we had to wake up.
And that requires courage, the courage to take that responsibility. And I think that really plays an important role. And it's an important invitation reminder for everybody tuning in now to prioritize having a spiritual experience, to prioritize having that the taste of your interconnectedness, of your oneness.
Yeah.
And once you experience that, I think you're radically transformed instantly.
Absolutely. You don't need to read 10 books, Just, 1 minute is enough. You get all the information that you need. And you don't, in fact, the books will, you can put them aside and you can now, you are ready to find out for yourself. And that's really what we are called to do. Not repeating what other people are saying or, doing what you're told to do. No. We are free human beings. We are to find out for ourselves.
And it's in that maturing process, I feel, we go from seekers on the path initially to knowers. We know. We don't need to seek it. You have the experience of it.
That's right.
And that's where the dogmatic beliefs fall away of who you are, where you come from, or whatever, and the experience of that starts to be born.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different reality.
That's right.
I'm curious your perspective on the greater impetus that drives a lot of these things. When you look at love, what do you see? How do you think about love in the way that it drives a lot of everything we're talking to about taking responsibility, about the experiences that give us the contrast of who we're not? What do you think about love as some sort of metaphysical property, a fundamental constituent? Like, what do you think about love?
I think about love as the fundamental is the feeling out of which all other feelings emerge. Is the foundation of the qualia, but is also a force. So it's not just, so it's the force that motivates you to find out who you are, is what's behind it. Know thyself. There is this love, which has to be love for yourself and for others, and that love has to be felt, and it gives you the degree to which you are, reaching toward knowing yourself and knowing others is the love. So love is also a measure of how you are reaching your objective, which is the fundamental objective that you came here to learn about. And so love is also, you can also understand it like I got this impression at the beginning, is the stuff of which everything is made, is the substance of all. Okay, but all those concepts are vague because what is substance in a world where there is no matter, right? Substance, everybody thinks of something concrete. So basically, and also, in my experience, that love was mixed with joy and peace. So it was not, in a sense, just love. It was also these other things that were together, because at the basic level, things are not separable. There is no, that's the fallacy of reductionism, that you can separate the variables and everything is separable. Like if you can put them into different boxes. No, at the deepest level, everything is interconnected, and that's the power of the concept of one, which is holistic, truly holistic. No, you say the words and then you forget about it and you start, making distinctions that separate the things. It's just, an interesting analogy that I use from time to time is to say, where's the boundary between red and orange? Is there a neat boundary that separates the color red from the color orange? We talk as if there was a boundary there. No, there is a region where both are true. There are regions where it's red, everybody agrees it's red, a region where everybody agrees it's orange, but then there is a region where you say it's red for you and say, no, it's orange for me. And so that region is both of them. That gives you an idea how science and spirituality, how physics and metaphysics are joining where there is no boundary. Now they become one. So therefore, the capacity and the methods of physics also need to be used in metaphysics, and the stuff that works in metaphysics, your consciousness as a tool for knowing, must be used also in physics. After all, how can we explore realities that cannot be measured in space and time? There is no instrument. The instruments are only space and time. How do you measure them? Consciousness is the only tool to measure those realities, through dreams, through out-of-body experiences, through all kinds of other experiences that are not in space and time.
Yeah, it really does seem like the universe works in paradox, and to be able to have anything approximating understanding objective reality, we need to be able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, which is a challenging experiment for people that are foreign to it.
Yeah, but it's the idea that there is an objective reality which is the problem.
Yeah, I suppose
you
so.
see, we always fall into the trap of thinking that there is an objective reality. No, there is not an objective reality.
In that case, you could say that what approximates objective reality is the fact that both are true. So yeah. It is. So
there
yeah,
is
it's the
something
totality
objective,
of it.
but the objectivity is not it's not an object.
Yeah, for sure. Rather, it's the spectrum.
It doesn't have boundaries. See, this is all. When we theorize, we have to do this because by theorizing, you have to, and to be certain, you have to decide that there is true and false. But in reality, not even in mathematics, there is only true and false. As you know, Gödel's theorems, right? I mean, any axiomatic system, you can make a statement that cannot be proven to be true or false. Is both or not or neither, whatever you want. But certainly is You cannot prove that it's, because if you prove that it's true, then it's false. If you prove that it's false, it's true. So you don't know. So either you take that statement, you say, I decided this statement, I take it to be true, then it becomes a postulate of a new theory that includes a new postulate but you have chosen to choose that thing that cannot be shown to be true or false as true or false. And then you bifurcate into different worlds.
The rabbit hole goes deep on this one. I just want to go back quickly to what we were speaking about love, and actually just read a few quotes here that I saw in your book, and then also from you. I think these all tie nicely in together. Alfred Tennyson said that complete knowledge is complete love. Greater knowledge is indissolubly linked to love, Periclesis. And Aristotle said something approximating to educate the mind without educating the heart is to not be educated at all.
Yeah. When we study physics, nobody educates your heart. Physics is not about heart. You see? And that's why physics and metaphysics, or spirituality much better, the capacity to experience from within must be integrated. We must go beyond the self-imposed limits of what a discipline can study and call reality. If to know is to bring into existence, that changes everything. You see?
And that goes hand in hand with what you said in the book about creation is therefore the manifestation of one's continuous search. Through the Seities, to get to know each other more and more, it is important to emphasize that to know is to love, and to love is to know.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, love and joy, are very close, right? I mean, that's sort of like they appear to be very, symmetrical, right? And so one of the greatest joys when you finally get a new thing that you were thinking, trying to understand it. Finally you get it. I got it, I got it, right? I mean, that's love. Joy and love mixed together. It's more joy than love, perhaps, but it's love. That's what knowing. I mean, I think this. What do I know? But the thrill when one knows itself and creates a monad, it must be an unbelievable thrill, right? I mean, just and
yeah. I really just enjoy the synthesization of both and exploring the gray. And, I've heard you speak to how reality has both a semantic and symbolic aspect, and how information has to then be inherently tied with meaning. And that's a really interesting thing to explore and to break down. Is there anything you want to share to help clarify that?
Sure. I mean, the concept of information, goes back to Shannon in 1948, created the theory of information in that year with that paper, famous paper. And the definition of information has nothing to do with meaning. The definition of information is the co-logarithm of the probability that a symbol manifests in a series of symbols. So you have symbols that appears. The probability that you can assign to that symbol is inversely proportional to the information carried by the symbol. So the more predictable is a symbol, the less information there is on that symbol, and vice versa. If a symbol has zero probability of happening, so it will never happen, if it were to happen, it would have infinite information. And if you know exactly the symbol that will manifest next, there is no information in that symbol, because that symbol begets the next one. So that definition of information only requires the recognition of the symbol, and not that the symbol carry any meaning. But for us, information without meaning is meaningless. For us, information, when we say, I got a lot of information, really you should have said, I got a lot of meaning from the symbols that I saw or that I heard, or, so what do I want to convey with the words that I'm using? Just the word, the recognition of the words by you, which would be what a computer would do? No, it's the meaning of those words is what I want to convey. And I have to use, because I cannot give you, my state is equivalent to a quantum information that cannot be reproduced. Quantum information cannot be reproduced. There is a theorem, the no-cloning theorem says you cannot reproduce quantum information. That's why the existence of consciousness and conscious experience can explain why quantum physics has to have these states that cannot be reproduced. Because the bits of the computer can be copied, can be reproduced as many times as you want. And that's why computers can never be conscious, because consciousness is a property that requires quantum states, which are not reproducible. You see, so if you start with consciousness and free will, you can explain everything else in a coherent manner, and you can explain why there has to be quantum physics, why there has to be classical physics, and all of that.
Okay, so what we're exploring here, and what you said earlier about how consciousness and free will must be properties of the original field, which is completely backwards from the traditional model. I want to spend a little bit of time exploring that and the understanding of free will. Would you say that we have free will to the degree in which we earn it or recognize who we are in our truest self? Because if we're continually being driven by unconscious drives, then it feels very much so we're more of like an automaton, we're just this machine that's has these biochemical reactions and driving us to this in this deterministic reality. So how do you see free will being connected to the original source, and how that translates to how we actually might or might not have it in this reality?
So free will is a property of the field, is not a property of the body. Again, we tend to give free will to the body. No. The free will is a decision of the field to make the body do something other than the automatism of the body would make the body do. So you see, there is a very subtle, a very important difference here. So the body does not have free will per se. The body is a physical structure that obeys laws. The free will is in the field that controls the body. In other words, the drone cannot decide to do what it wants. If you don't do anything, the drone goes around like this waiting for you to tell him what to do, for example. It does what we have told him to do. But the drone does not have the freedom to decide, now I do over there. That's unless you give him that authority. And in that case, it's still not free will. It simply will do what you told it to do. Okay? So the body is a little bit like that, right? Almost identical like that, almost, because the body is also quantum and classical, right? But the body that in general does not have free will. So if I, conscious being, allow the body to do what it wants, then the behavior of the body can be predictable, because the body is a machine. So it can be predicted. Its behavior can be predicted. But if the consciousness intervenes and make the body do something different than it was programmed to do, then the body will do what the consciousness wants. And so that's a free will choice. You see the difference? So the body simply is, responds to what the free will of the field wants, and the free will of the field is the one that has to learn about itself and use properly the body in order for the field to know itself. Because the self-knowing is in the field, is not in the body. The body simply memorizes things that are important for the body to function and be quasi-autonomous. But that's it. And that's why when the body falls off, this stuff remains, which is the knowing, the free will, and so on. So, we have to be careful again, because we tend to attribute to the body then free will. The body doesn't have free will, essentially.
So to the degree we identify with the body, we don't have free will as well. So would you say to the degree we wake up to who we are beyond the body, the more free will that we access? Because we're still making decisions and choices here within the structure of the physical body.
The part that wakes up again is not the body,
Right.
is the ego, which is a portion of the Seity. The ego that believed to be the body is the one that wakes up. So also the ego that still believes to be the body and believes also that it should do certain things and not others, is also a mechanism, because it's basically making the body do what it believes, which is a closed system. It is not really free. It is imprisoned in a sense by its own belief structure. So only an awakened ego can actually have really free will.
Well, you say awakened ego, but do you feel like the intelligence of the heart is better verbiage there? Because I feel there's two kind of different places we can make decisions from,
Yeah.
There is the egoic structure in which we can make decisions from, but then there's also an intelligence of the heart that speaks to us more softly that we start to listen to, that is more coherent.
Yes. And that's where, and the true courage, the true courageous decision, which is absolutely can only be, otherwise it wouldn't be courageous, a free will decision, is something that goes against what the body would have done. Otherwise, otherwise the body simply would do whatever was programmed to do by its own life and the interaction with the consciousness. Because the interaction with think of the body and the consciousness as the way that we behave when we train a neural network, a computer, an artificial intelligence system. We are the ones that given the data that the AI needs to learn from, and we tell them what to, we tell them right, wrong, and so on. So we are coaching this thing to imitate our own understanding of reality. There is no understanding here. There's the pretense of understanding here, but the understanding is in the consciousness. Who learns is actually the programmer of the AI, not the AI. They tell you that the AI has learned, but in reality, who has learned is the guy, that controls the machine. Okay, the machine will simply then repeat what it was made to learn by this other guy. The same way as our consciousness and the body is like the AI system, and our consciousness is the supervisor of the AI system. So as the consciousness learns, the body also learns, and it can then later on repeat what he has learned that wasn't there before. So there is a continuing learning in the body, it's like a continuing AI, increasing its capacities. But in reality, the body simply mirrors and, sort of parrots what the learning is, and the knowing is in the consciousness that controls it. Again, we tend to think that we are the body, and that tricks us every time to think that as a body, then we have certain properties that are not properties of the body, they are properties of the field.
So when you look at reincarnation, do you feel like that's compatible with this theory, and like what the moment of the physical body dying is the Seity would then inhabit a new incarnation into another body? What do you feel like is most likely?
Well, the accounts of the near-death experiences, which there are thousands and thousands out there,
and also the accounts of the children who have clear recognition, or they can validly prove the existence of them somehow knowing where their previous life was, how it was killed, the things that they had, the places they live, etc.
Those accounts, are clearly consistent with the theory that I'm telling you. Basically, when the body dies, the ego, which believed to be the body, no longer has these signals, that it was paying attention to, are all scrambled up, or they're not even there. And then it looks around, wow, I'm still here. And he finds himself over the body, looking down at the body, which is being operated in an operating room in the hospital. And then he describes properly what happened. Then he moves into another environment. He meets, their dead parents or friends that were dead, and has wonderful, heartfelt connection with them. And then he is told to get back to his body, and he wakes up and, oh shit, I had to live a little more in this life. It was so much better up there, right? So those are the typical near-death experience. That is telling you very likely what might happen to you. So the difference is that if the body is not resuscitated by a good doctor, you simply move beyond that experience when you are in that expansive state, and then you continue to live in that different reality until you are embodied again in a different body and have another experience. So that's very consistent. It cannot be explained with neuroscience at all. In fact, the neuroscience has to say that those experiences are crazy, are just imaginations. But how can a brain that doesn't work imagine? Especially imagine something which is so transformative that 90% of the people that have this kind of experience find their life transformed by that experience. So when the brain wasn't working, it was doing more for them than when it was working.
It's so fascinating, and I kind of want to zoom out just a little bit. I often think about how recent civilization is, and writing, and the vast grand scheme of evolution of this planet and the solar system and the galaxies. I'm curious what you think, if there was like a 25th century person with an average knowledge of whatever developments happened between now and then, if they were to look back on the time of us having this conversation and the collective understanding of really where the world is at in the 21st century, what observations do you think that they would make about where we are at in our own developmental journey and the framework we have around understanding consciousness?
Yeah. I think that it depends how humanity will really transform itself in the next 100 years. I think we have 100 years that can set the stage of what will happen in 500 years from now, because there is a possibility of self-destruction if we do not use AI, do not use atomic energy, we do not solve the climate problem properly, and so on, that we have in front of us. So there is there are scenarios there that are not happy for mankind. If mankind overcomes this problem, then mankind will look back and hopefully a much larger percentage than what we would do now with our mindset, would then look back and say, wow, how could we be so ignorant or how we could misunderstand reality so much to think that the only reality that existed is the reality in space and time. This reality, that classical reality, essentially, the scientism, the materialism, the reductionism that we have today, will be looked as a aberration in the history of mankind, because, thousands of years ago, we did not think this way. We were much more connected with a deeper reality, with a deeper sense of who we are. Not everybody, but the highest mind, the people that were writing books, the people that were translating their sense of reality, have given us an account of their thinking that is much more open to the deeper dimensions of human dimensions than what we have today with scientism. Scientism eliminates any meaning from reality, any purpose from the universe. So 500 years from now, we will look back and say, how could we be so, could have been so mistaken about what we thought about is real? Because at that point, I believe that we would have learned to explore deeper realities that today we don't give them any reality. with our consciousness and find out that we are beings of light, that we are beings that, go immensely beyond what we now give credit to ourselves.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, us looking back on the 16th century right now and how much of what we were ignorant to then is just now everyday life for us. And if you just plucked somebody out from that time period, took a time machine back and showed them all the things that we have in the, in the world and what we understand about reality, it'd be so surreal where, it's like a Star Trek movie in comparison, and so the growth of technology is so exponential that, who could even imagine if we do make it through the existential crisis that we find ourselves in, what life will be like. And there were a couple of things that I want to sidebar in terms of AI and the possibility of destructing ourselves in the next 100 years, where this is a very pivotal time that we live in right now, where it's make or break it for humanity. Part of the shift of that awakening process is starting to once again value our interiors and the resurgence of valuing our interiors instead of just the reality that we can dissect in the Cartesian way of understanding the world around us. We start to explore, consciousness and how we are in this conversation at a much deeper level. And so that to me is why I feel like immersive experiences and creating containers in which people can have the taste of who they are in a more fundamental way, that feels like the first domino that everyone needs to be able to have the experience of, or as many people need to be able to have the experience of, which will then change everything. Like how you relate to the biosphere completely changes when you feel your connection to it, right? Yeah. And so there's so many of these implications that change when we first have the experience of our interconnected nature. So I'm just curious to hear any thoughts you have as we start to shift societally to valuing our interiors again.
Yeah. But the crucial thing is to include into this interiority heart and belly, what I call the courageous actions, the ability to act with free will that comes from the deeper aspect of who we are. So, which is generally not acknowledged by science today. What is the heart? I mean, the heart is an organ that beats, When we talk about heart in the context of spirituality, the heart is love, is peace, is joy, is the comprehension, is knowing, all that. And if those are not valued, or they're valued only for what the usefulness that they can bring, that's not good enough, because the value is in knowing, is not in the usefulness. Because when the body dies, we are not in a world where we can barter, chips for dollars. That world doesn't have this stuff. I mean, that world is a world of self-knowing. It's the world where meaning is the currency. In that world, is not goods, it's not numbers. It's something that goes beyond. So to me, that is the essence of the transformation. If we don't, we can become highly technologically advanced. That's another possibility. 500 years from now, highly technological society with no heart whatsoever, just like machines. We have turned ourselves into machines that work with other machines, and that's it. So and that would be truly dystopic as a future. But that's a possibility.
Yeah, one of the first inputs I ever put into ChatGPT, I said, write me the plot of a story where AI takes over the world, and it gave me this reality of two different factions that create off, one that is more naturalist and connected and religious in a way that it explained it, versus the worshiping the cyborgs that come to be in super intelligent AGI, right? And so as we start to see, and it's on the doorstep, it's here any moment now, the super intelligent AGI is going to bear many fruits and solve many problems. And if we're not careful and not understanding within the proper context of the discussion we have about our interiorities and who we are, then we could wrongly attribute it to being the new God in a way, you know?
Yeah. We become an idol. You know, adoration for this, this idol.
Because it'll appear to be a God worth worshiping, perhaps.
Absolutely, absolutely. But in doing so, we diminish ourselves, and we basically become appendices of this idol, as opposed to being in control of simply a technology that can help us know ourselves. And so it is a choice that we will have to make. Exactly, this is happening in this 100 years that we have in front of us. In my opinion, of course, what do I know? But for all that I see, mankind is, many of us are called to make a choice. Are you a machine, or are you a soul? In whichever way you think about soul, it's something that survives death. Are you a machine? A machine dies. A soul doesn't die. Okay, so, and that's the it's a very clear dichotomy here. It's not So, do you believe that you will survive death or not? So, if you believe that you do not survive death, then you go into the singularity, transferring your consciousness to a computer, live forever there. I mean, all this stuff, right? If, on the other hand, if you believe that you are not a body, you are a field, you are a conscious being that survives death, completely different story.
The necessity is moving beyond the belief into the knowing that we are beyond that, right? The felt experience. I'm just curious to hear a little bit more of your thoughts about the transhuman movement. And Terence McKenna has that quote, "Humanity is as sex organs of the machine world." We are here essentially to birth the new species or race of intelligence, which is very...
Frankly, I find it abominable as a conception. Because it goes to the extreme. It adds insult to injury, because it calls consciousness what is not consciousness. Basically, it means that those people have not understood anything about who they are. And that's the real problem. So, how else can it's crazy. But on the other hand, a lot of people believe that that's the way it's going to be. So that's why this age is an age of choice, making a choice. And how it will be made by humanity will determine the future. I don't know what it will be. I made my choice, but that's it. And so I share the logic of my choice, but fundamentally my choice was based on an experience that only if you have a similar experience, you can have the same conviction that I have. Because my conviction does not come from having read a book or many books. It comes from having experience. So the capacity to experience we all have, but the willingness to experience, the willingness to believe that you can experience that, opening yourself up to that, that's the key. Most people don't want to go there, so they will never have this experience, not because they cannot have it, because they don't want to have it. They want to continue to believe the story that they believe. And so there is no way out of that, because we are free. So, no one can force another person to choose a road that has free will to choose. That only that person. So it's a personal responsibility again. Every one of us has to choose. Who do I believe? What do I believe? And you have to believe yourself. And if you believe that you are a machine, so be it.
What do you feel of the reality that we are living in sort of nested dimensions where perhaps there is a larger Seity in which all of these Seities exist? We're speaking about the one. It's almost as if, just like on an individual level, we have our own trauma, suffering, and experience that we need to, resolve, remember who we truly are. We're kind of in a collective experience of that as well.
Yeah, no, I believe that there are hierarchies of Seities. The lowest level Seities that we can understand right now are the elementary particles, the fields of elementary particles, because the elementary particles, as I said, don't exist as objects. They only exist as states of the fields. So fields are the simplest one that we can imagine because we have studied those fields. But then us, maybe thousands of hierarchy levels up, because from elementary particles, then you go to nucleons, from nucleons to atoms, from atoms to molecules, macromolecules, blah, 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 cells, combination of cells, blah, 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 mankind. Come on, that obviously, does it stop there? Of course not. It has to keep on going. So there must be some entity that essentially is the entire ecosystem of the planet. That is, its body is the ecosystem of the planet. It stands to reason if this hierarchy continues. We see a hierarchical organization anyway in the cosmos, right? We get solar systems, many solar systems eventually creates a galaxy. A galaxy, form groups, and then groups of galaxy, groups of groups, and so on, and eventually the universe, right? So, there can be already, or what we see, we can see many levels above us.
I think it can be tricky to trying to label things as benevolent or malevolent.
Yeah.
But would you say that there are Seities that are higher up on that hierarchy level that have more degrees of free will, where they have potentially positive or negative intentions?
Yeah. I see, again, those are gray areas.
Yeah.
So it's very, I can give you, now we are talking about opinions as opposed to a theory, right?
Yeah.
The theory that I expressed early, that's a theory that can be falsified and everything else, and it can be done properly, but now is opinions. Okay, so I can give you an opinion.
And just quickly before you do, I just look at on a human level, at our level of Seities, there is the spectrum from somebody who is like a Stalin or Hitler to St. Francis of Assisi and Mother Teresa. And obviously they're complicated individuals in their own right. But it seems like there are energies in of themselves in this realm of duality that are at play. And if there are bigger Seities, or collections of Seities, then it would kind of make sense to intuit that there are bigger forces on both of those polarities.
Yeah. For what I understand at this point, I would say that the fundamental polarity about us, who we are here, is whether your intention is to uphold yourself as you work for yourself, you want to know for yourself, you want to do everything for yourself or for others. Okay.
Service to self, service
to self, service to other. Okay, I see that a very fundamental polarity, which which allows, if you work hard to yourself, you can progress up to a certain point, and then because everybody will work for himself, then eventually one will turn against the other. So you can only go so far with that idea. Okay. How far can we go? I don't know. But to me, that's the sense that I have. Then if you work for others, then you can keep on going. You can keep on growing. You can keep on, knowing more about yourself, more inclusive and more expansive, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I love that framework. Yeah. Very practical also individually. There's that depiction of those people at a round table with those super long forks.
Yeah.
Where everyone's starving to death.
Yeah.
They have these, small mouths, and they can't feed themselves because the fork is so long.
Yeah.
But when we start feeding each other, we cooperate, recognize our interdependence.
That's very good. I like it. Yeah, it's a good metaphor.
Amazing. Is there anything within your framework, theory, model that you feel like we haven't talked about that you would like to have established in this conversation? Because I know we've been diving a lot into the interiorities of things. The science goes super deep. We don't have to go super deep into it. But I'm just curious.
Well, the duality between competition and cooperation, for example, which is, again, the competition would be the mindset of the person that works for himself. Mm-hmm. He competes with the others because he only wants his own good. Okay, cooperation instead is what allows growth, continuing growth, as opposed to growing up to a certain point. So to me, competition, which is today at the heart of what we understand life and what we, depict life. Life is the survival of the fittest, or the fitter, whatever you want to call it. How can that be? How can the survival of the fittest justify 50 trillion cells that work together in a body so that I can find my way to the bathroom without every cell saying, I don't want to go there, I want to go there, this way, that way. That. You see what I mean? So, cooperation is the foundation. And from cooperation, as a special case, you can get competition. But from competition, you cannot get cooperation. Competition is a door, a closed door. So, we have an idea, typically, of the emergent property. The emergent property. Consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. Wow. How can more emerge from less? It cannot. How can you get free will from determinism? You can get determinism as a special case of free will, but not vice versa. And only quantum physics has the capacity to do the following. The sum of the parts creates something which is much more than the sum of the parts. In classical physics, the sum of the parts is the whole and is only the sum of the parts. So you can always reduce the whole to the sum of its parts. But it's only the sum of the parts. It's never more than the sum of the parts. So emergentism does not exist in classical physics. It only can exist in quantum physics. That's another thing that most scientism doesn't, a materialistic view does not accept, because they don't understand quantum physics. Quantum physics has properties that go way, way beyond classical physics. Entanglement is what connects everything from the inside. Competition tends to separate. Okay, cooperation connects even more. We need to learn to cooperate. In the future, if we do not cooperate, we will kill each other, because there is no other choice, because everybody's for himself. And right now we are in this in this situation where we have both parts here are playing in this reality, but there has to be eventually a way in which cooperation is the real way. But when we understand that if we do a good or bad to another, the good and bad that we do to another will come back and return to us. So we must stop believing that because only if we think that we are separate, I can do bad to you, because if I do bad to you, it's your problem, not mine. But once I understand that if I do something bad to you, that's my problem too, then I will stop doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just you know inherently that you don't want to cut off your left arm because you experience it as part of yourself.
Yep.
And so when you start to experience other people as part of yourself, you don't need to teach them morality. It's just, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Absolutely. That's direct knowing.
Yeah, a direct gnosis. One thing that I was curious about is, if there are all different types of Seities and there's maybe emergent life on different galaxies and all over the place, what do you think about alien life and the possible reality of? Do you strongly feel that they?
Of course.
Exist?
I mean, it would be. It would be silly to think that we are the only ones here, in this planet. I mean, with gazillions of planets, already in this galaxy, never mind the gazillion of galaxies that there are, that we are the only living organism here that, have sentience. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Besides, sentience is everywhere, right? I mean, this theory that I was telling you, sentience starts with the quantum fields, and then quantum fields combines and it grows. So sentience is everywhere. It's a panpsychist model, but it is quantum panpsychism. It is not classical panpsychism, which is what everybody else talks about. Quantum panpsychism recognizes the properties of quantum information and how you can explain the collapse of the wave function with free will decisions of a field that is conscious. So it is all self-consistent.
Yeah.
And we need to go beyond and just move on. But moving on means accepting, just let's give it a chance. If you believe that you are a body, you believe it so much, and you think that when the body dies, you're dead, forget it. I mean, there is no way out. But why do you have to ask yourself, why do I want this reality since I cannot prove that is real or not? You cannot prove what I'm saying either. But why do I want that reality? What do I get? That's how you start by getting responsible for what happens to you. Why do I want that reality? What is my payoff to believe that I'm only the body? I can tell you what I was thinking then, that then I can do what I want. When I die, it's game over, so I might as well have fun in this world, do whatever, do whatever I want because there are no consequences. That's the ultimate non-responsibility.
Yeah.
Not the ultimate responsibility. The ultimate responsibility is to know that whatever you do to another, you do to yourself.
Man, there have been so many different nuances in this whole conversation that are so important, I feel like, for people to hear, and I've been thoroughly enjoying throughout this whole thing, and you've been articulating super well, and it's been just an honor to get to know more of your work and more recently get introduced to your whole world. And so just thank you. Gratitude for you in this conversation.
It's been a pleasure for me as well.
Yeah.
Really, it's a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to leave the floor open for anything that we haven't touched on that you feel like you want to share before we start to wrap up.
I love you, man.
I love you too, bro. It's so good. Man, this is my favorite thing ever. So thank you for allowing me to do what I do. And I feel this conversation will be really fruitful and serve a lot of people, and that service to others, and thank God for that awakening experience you had, and for the journey and the courage that you personally had to move into the path where it's scary to move this way when a lot of people are moving this way. It takes that courage.
There's courage.
But you reap what you sow, and you've been sowing some beautiful things. So, man, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Andre.
And for everyone who wants to tune in to more of what Federico's up to in the world, Irreducible is an amazing book you guys can check out. It'll be linked down in the description below, as well as your website and things people will be able to find out below. And that's it, man. We did it.
Thank you, Andre. It's a real pleasure.
Of course. Everybody who's been tuning to this episode of the Know Thyself podcast, let us know in which way this resonates with your own personal journey and what you found uniquely impactful. And until next time, be well.